Now, if you've been following my channel for a while, you know that the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K is by far my favorite video camera. But I want to give you guys 7 pro tips that I have kind of implemented through using this camera for the past year that has really helped me take my productions and just the use of this camera to the next level. What's good, creative fan? Brandon Washington here, and let's not waste any time. Let's go ahead and jump into my 7 pro tips for using the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K or 6K. Now, the first tip that I have for you guys is actually the built-in Slate tool that comes with this camera. Now, I think I pretty much had this camera for probably around maybe 6 to 7 months before I realized there was actually a Slate tool built into this camera. Now, typically I don't slate a lot of my projects, but whenever my projects are scripted, I definitely slate them. Now, this here, just as an example, is a script that a client actually wrote up, so it's not formatted properly because my client wrote it, but no big deal. The biggest reason why you want to slate your projects, especially when there's a script involved, is because typically you're not shooting in order. And whenever you're not shooting in order, you can't miss a shot. So slating is the way that you do it. Typically, I like to have a script supervisor, and the basic idea of slating, just to make it super simple in the way that you can use it with this camera, is you divide your shots or your script into different scenes, whether there's a scene in an office and then there's another scene in a restaurant. And so you divide it out into different scenes, and then the different camera angles you're gonna need in those different scenes. And then you can then kind of monitor it by takes. So if you have people that are messing up, that's where you always hear take 1, take 2, take 3, take 37, if it takes that many. You know, you're getting all these different takes, so that way you can make a note on your script which one is best. Now, I like the fact that the Blackmagic has that information built in, and if you are using an editor that supports that, like Final Cut or DaVinci Resolve, or I believe Premiere does it as well, you can actually immediately go to your takes and kind of notate, especially if you have notes in here that say take 3 was a good take, then you can go immediately to take 3 without having to write down every single little file number and every single file that was a good take. You can immediately do that right from your slate. And so I love the fact that that is built into this camera. Now, that being said, tip number 2 is actually something that's really interesting, and that is that good take that I just mentioned. So on the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera, it already gives you the option to note if a shot was a good take. Now, the only downside to this is that from what I can tell, it's only supported in DaVinci, but if you're someone who's already editing all your videos in DaVinci, I would strongly recommend starting to do that. So you can actually go into DaVinci, and when you're looking at all of your files and you have it not in the thumbnail view, but in the list view, you can actually show good takes, and you'll see there's a little check mark next to the takes that you labeled as a good take. And you can do that right from the back of the camera. Now, the best part is, like, you don't have to actually do that in the moment. If you're like after the shoot is over, going through the footage on the back of your camera and you're like, oh, that's a good shot, you can just swipe over from the side, access your slate, and then be able to tap good take, and that way it'll be listed for you when you get to your editor later. Now, slating is great, the good take is good, but I personally think what takes all of this stuff to the next level is when you actually combine it with the Bluetooth app you can download for your iPhone or iPad. In my personal opinion, this is probably one of the #1 things you should definitely get for the Blackmagic. Now, the app, unfortunately, is not free. However, I definitely think that it is worth investing in. I don't think it's that expensive. I want to say it was around maybe 10 to 20 bucks for the app. But once you get it, it allows you to Bluetooth connect to your Blackmagic, and then you can control the entire Blackmagic camera from this app. Everything. I'm talking your frames per second, your iris, if your lens supports that, your shutter angle, your ISO. You can come over here, you can control zebras, you can control any of your grids. You can actually control what format you're shooting in. So if you're shooting Blackmagic RAW, ProRes, what flavor of Blackmagic RAW, what compression you want to do, if you're going to shoot 4K versus HD. You can do all that from this app and have complete control of the camera. But on top of that, you also get Slate control as well, which I think is a game changer for this whole deal, because now you can give the script and the slate directly to your script supervisor, and they can actually manage all of that stuff without being right behind you on camera. Both of you have control over all of that information as well. So if you're behind camera and you want to say that was a good take, you can notate it, or you can tell your actual script supervisor to say, hey, that was a good take, and they can actually mark it right here, and it'll be saved in the metadata on the camera. All right, so the fourth pro tip, kind of moving away from the Slating stuff, actually has to do with the high frame rate mode. And that is that this thing has a quick high frame rate button. Now, I remember the very first time I ever shot with the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera, I didn't know what that button was, and it really confused me. But quickly I realized the big benefits to it. First of all, this camera has the ability to shoot at 120 frames per second, but the only way to do that is through that high frame rate mode. The other nice thing about the high frame rate mode is that if you want to shoot even at, let's just say 60 frames per second, but you want that slow motion baked into the footage so that way it's smooth and you don't have to worry about editing it later and getting your timing right, it can do all of that from right here. Basically what happens is you set what you want your actual timeline frame rate to be in. So for most of us, that's going to be 24 frames per second. And then you set it to a higher frame rate than that. So whether that's 60, 96, or even 120, you shoot your footage and then it plays back in that slow motion on the back of the camera. So especially if you're trying to show off a slow motion shot for a client and you want them to be able to see it exactly how it's going to be edited later, just shooting it in high frame rate mode, I personally find works great. The only downside to shooting in high frame rate mode, at least from what I can tell, is that whenever you're shooting at like 120 frames per second, there is a pretty substantial crop. But I mean, how often are you really going to be shooting at 120 frames per second, and can you just get the right lens to kind of fix that for you? That's pretty much what I've done, but I love shooting in that high frame rate mode because it just makes editing a whole lot easier, especially not having to deal with retiming later in post. Now, the fifth tip that I have for you guys is one that I didn't do for a long time, and then once I did it, I was kind of kicking myself that I hadn't done it yet, and that was installing my own LUTs onto this camera. Now, you have the ability to actually install a few LUTs onto this camera, and so I strongly recommend that you do. Now, obviously, there are great Rec 709 LUTs for this camera, but there are like 3 pretty much go-to LUTs that I use all the time with the Blackmagic. And because I use those 3 all the time, I went ahead and installed them on the camera. The reason why I did that is so whenever I'm trying to get proper exposure or I'm trying to see what my scene is going to look like once I get it to post, it's so nice that the exact same LUTs that I use to kind of start my footage on my computer is already installed on the camera. And so I'm getting a clean look. And on top of that, if I'm showing someone else a shot, they're not trying to ask me, why does it look so dark, or why does it look so unsaturated? Why don't the colors pop? You can show it to them with that LUT on there. And then you can even create one of these preset buttons to actually toggle that on and off. Because I personally like to shoot without seeing it, but I like to set my scene by seeing it with that LUT. And so I have one of these function buttons kind of preset up to toggle my LUT on and off. Continuing along with making things easier, tip number 6 I have for you guys is actually to create presets. Now, this one was something that I had no clue that this camera could do until I started trying to figure out, like, you know, how could I make this easier for myself? And I started playing in the menus and found presets. Presets are sort of like saved menus or saved like looks in camera. So for example, like someone like myself, I shoot these YouTube videos consistently and then I shoot for my church every Sunday. The benefit for me with having these presets is every time I come to sit down in my office, I have a preset set for my office. It has the ISO already set, it has the white balance already set, it has the audio set to accept mics from my lavalier mic here that I wear, and it has everything in there down to I shoot in ProRes at 422 in 1080p, and my white balance is set. Like, I love the fact that all of that is done. I don't have to worry about messing with my camera because I can control everything here, like my lighting. I get my lighting set the exact same way every single time. So then when I turn on my camera, I go to presets, I hit office, it's all done. Now, on the flip side, when I get to my church, everything is completely different. The lighting is totally different. I'm actually accepting audio via XLR. And so I have a preset set up for my church that presets the exposure. It presets how I'm actually gonna capture as far as the quality, but then it also automatically changes my audio to receive that audio via XLR. And so I love the fact that presets just makes it easy when I'm shooting things on a regular basis and I don't have to worry about trying to remember what were my settings like last time. Presets are a game changer, especially if you shoot the same thing over and over and over again. You don't have to reset up your camera in between shoots. All right, and the seventh and final tip that I have for you guys is really a really easy one, and that is, you notice these doors that used to be here? Go ahead and take them off. As someone who shoots with this camera on a regular basis, these doors constantly got in the way. They don't really move out of the way easily, but one thing is that they do remove very easily. Now, it was a little scary the first time I did it, I'm not gonna lie, but all you have to do is grab on the doors and then just pull on them until they pop out and literally just store them away. And the nice part is you can actually put them back in, and I actually walked a buddy of mine through that once before when he had to send his Blackmagic in for support. But you can put the doors back on. The big thing for me is that this camera is not weather sealed, it's not weather protected. And so, you know, these little openings here, I'm not really too worried about them. I never put my camera in a situation where it's gonna get dust or wet or anything like that because it's not weather sealed. So having these doors off just really makes it so much easier whenever I'm actually using this camera out in the field. It's one less headache I have to deal with. But there you have it, guys. Those are the 7 pro tips that I use with this camera on a regular basis. I absolutely love the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera, and I keep finding new and better things with this camera. As I've said, it is by far my favorite film camera, but I would love to know some feedback from you guys. Are there any tips that I maybe didn't bring up that you think are huge and that every Blackmagic owner needs to know? Leave those down in the comments below. I love using this channel as a way to get new ideas and to help other filmmakers grow and to continue to use their Blackmagics at their absolute best. But let me know what you guys are using. Let me know how you're using your Blackmagic, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.